Good morning, my name is John with the Pine Tree, and I have the great pleasure of sitting down with Doug Shinn this morning, and we're going to talk about a couple issues you may have seen in the news lately, and a couple, on our site, and also a couple of other local outlets on driveway slopes. And I think this is an issue that if you have questions or concern on, we're going to try to go over some of the issues and some of that. And thank you very much Thank you, Doug. Now, you've been doing a lot of homework on this, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Lots of time.
Now, for people who aren't familiar with it or maybe out of the area or something, now tell us the genesis of this, I guess, the piece of legislation. I guess this came out of, what, the Oakland Hills fire? Isn't this something that's been, or that?
It's hard to pin down exactly, but it's fire regulation that was enacted back in 1991, as a matter of fact, so it goes way back.
All right.
But I'll give you a little quick history and try to be as brief as possible.
Sure.
But this is a very complex issue and has big ramifications for our area, for the entire county. So I'll try to be brief.
All right.
Prod me along if you need to.
And just if you know, if you're watching this, what we're going to try to do is take the first few minutes and kind of go over a synopsis of it, and then if Doug has some details and stuff he wants to get in towards the end. So if you want to, if you can spend a few minutes with us on the front end, we'll give you most of the big picture. Isn't that the
right?
Okay.
We will get big picture and interrupt me at any time. And tap me on the back of the head and ask any question you have, John. This all started when customers that I have sold land to, lots, basically building sites in the area, ran into problems at the county based on simple words, driveway slope. And the builder that, in one case, that was working on this, Terry Thompson, called me and said, "Hey, Doug," and this was about a month ago, "Hey, Doug, what's this thing with driveway slope?" And I said, "I have no idea. I've never heard of such a thing as a driveway slope issue as it affects getting a building permit in our county." So I started to do some research to find out what the heck was going on here, because past method of doing business for all realtors, certainly in the Evetts Pass area, which I'm most familiar with, was that the only thing you needed to get a building permit was septic approval. If you could put a septic system on a lot, you could get a building permit.
So in essence, if you could go through the process to get a permit through the county for a septic, that in of itself would probably mean that most of the rest of all the other things were doable on that site.
Absolutely, and that's been the standard of practice since the first house was built in Arnold up until 30 days ago, John, if you can picture that.
Got it.
So needless to say, this came out of nowhere, and this took some research to find out what was this all about.
Right.
So in doing the research, I uncovered quite a bit of information. And it is true that that owners are having a problem getting approvals depending on their driveway slope.
Okay.
So so this affects land ownership. This affects not only new permits, but new subdivision approvals, lot splits, all manner of approvals down at the county. So here's what I learned. Back in 1991, the legislation, which is loosely called 4290, goes to fire safety issues in a state responsibility area. And in Calaveras County, everything is a state responsibility area, with the exception of any municipality, which would be the city of Angels Camp,
which is our only incorporated city. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So this covers a big portion of Calaveras County, and it's a state law, so this affects the entire state of California, and we found out about it here in Evetts Pass
one thing
just recently.
Interesting to me is, we were doing a little background on this, is when this started to come out, if you look at the quote-unquote prior art, or what is out there for a lot of the other counties, I was expecting more of a body of work than was even out there. I mean, I think it's, in some ways, we're the cutting edge.
It's starting to pop up throughout the state as people discover this, and the best way I can do this is say that in 1991 the legislation was passed, but generally it was legislation about defensible space, how an owner should take care of their parcel, raking pine needles, the 30-foot rule back then, identifying house numbers, how to mark a fire hydrant that's close to your property. Pretty Good basic legislation.
So if a fire truck rolls up, they have a pretty clear delineated path to help you.
No problem.
Yeah.
And of course that legislation over the years gets updated as a body of work, and it's in the California Code of Regulations. And in fact, and I think an important point here is that when the rule recently was amended so that the 30-foot rule became a 100-foot rule,
right.
We as owners looked at that, and maybe some initially responded, wow, that's more than three times regulation. But you know what? It's in my own best interest. And for that reason, I'm going to get out there and support that rule. And personally, on my own lot, I did that, and I said, boy, I feel good. I'm more fire safe. That's a good regulation. That's good for me.
Right.
In this case, we have a regulation that my reaction is completely the opposite.
We've heard that from a number of people this last few weeks.
My reaction is that this government regulation is not good for me, and it's not good for anyone in the county, as it affects their ability to build and some other things that we're going to get into.
Okay.
So bottom line, Calaveras County adopted a regulation as was required, and a simple regulation, and in there they had their own driveway slope regulations. And above 3,000 feet, no driveway was supposed to be greater than 12%.
Okay.
Below 3,000 feet, no driveway was supposed to be greater than 16%.
Now, a point of clarification on this, as I understand, is that's not the average of the slope, that is any portion of that.
Cal Fire Code is that if any portion of a driveway exceeds these numbers, which are going to be a little confusing for a while, but we'll get them boiled down.
Yeah.
Any portion of the driveway exceeds these numbers, your driveway does not comply.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, but then a sentence in the code back adopted by Calaveras County in 1992 simply said that any driveway with a grade exceeding the maximum grade permitted shall be provided with an asphalt or concrete surface.
Right.
So a finished surface. That rule was the standard of operation right up until 30 days ago, John. In other words, every driveway could be approved as long as it had a finished surface.
And I think, didn't this have some common sense to it, where like you see a lot of, not just up here in Arnold, but even down in the Copperopolis area, stuff where you have some steeper slopes, as long as the driveway was treated in such a manner, I mean, whether it was ribbing or some, abrasive, it made it to where it...
There was never a discussion.
This, right?
There was never a discussion. The rule at the county was, if you're more than these numbers, you must be paid. Well, most people, by this point in time, as we move through time, most people were going from unpaved driveways to paved driveways.
Right.
This created no hardship.
Right.
And that's why, up until 30 days ago, every driveway could be approved to gain a building permit.
Sure.
In fact, no one ever even thought about driveway approvals until about 30 days ago. Okay. That language was never in our thinking as we looked at a lot for its building. Okay. Again, back to the one rule, it needed to have an approved septic system.
And I guess a little bit of, I mean, there are some properties that there were, some of those driveways can be a little hairy. I mean, on some of those, I mean, there may be certain times of the year you may not want to go up them as much, but at least
all you have to do is drive around Evans Pass, and you'll see a little bit of everything.
Yes.
We're in the mountains.
Right.
As they have hills in Valley Springs, they have slopes in Copperopolis.
Right.
They have slopes in Malibu.
Sure.
They have slopes in San Diego where the recent fires were. California is not a flat landscape.
Now, I guess a question on those slopes is I think some of the ones that you see around here that are obviously steep. Those actually may be not just a little bit, but significantly higher than actually what this regulation is. Because isn't there something on the 20, as I understand it, and we may, this may go forward, but understanding may change, but the cutoff for this is the 21%, isn't it? Isn't it above the 21%? It's kind of the...
Well, you're jumping ahead just a little bit, but let me catch up, because, again, this is complicated. So we had the rule of operation until a month ago. At that point in time, we said, well, where's this new rule? Where's this? What are we hearing? Slope approvals and 16% and 21%. What does this all mean?
And that's where the 4290 all starts coming up.
And that's where the research comes up, because you had a spinning issue with CAL FIRE pointing at the county and the county pointing at CAL FIRE.
Right.
CAL FIRE is a new nickname for the California, old California CDF. That's the state agency. So in digging around, I uncovered the Code of Regulation, and I want to stress this is quite a large document, and this goes to defensible space issues, and generally 99% of this is something that every citizen would have no trouble supporting whatsoever.
Right.
However, in the middle of this legislation is section 1273.03 that reads roadway grades.
Right.
Hey, roads, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
You can build a new road, you ought to have a proper grade, right? Beautiful. And it reads, the grade for all roads, streets, private lanes, and driveways shall not exceed 16%, period. End of story. You cannot, according to this legislation, in California, have a driveway greater than 16% slope in order to earn a building permit.
Wow.
So that would take all of the land in California with a slope greater than 16% with a driveway access. And if I interpret this correctly, and we're learning as we go on this, that would possibly make those unbuildable. So we went from that to great concern. We developed from this initial research a public meeting held at the firehouse at its past fire district building, and that was a community group. Everybody expressed concern. There was some sharing and learning. From there, we said, hey, we got to get down to the county. We got to get all the fire officials involved, and that led to a meeting on the 12th of December 2007 for what it was loosely referred to as a stakeholders meeting.
And we were there. That was a fun and exciting meeting, wasn't it?
John, it was a grinder. It was 3.5 hours of trying to figure out how this is all going to work.
Yes, it was.
if indeed it will work.
Yeah.
So that meeting, and the term stakeholders is just a loose group of people who all have some stake in the issue, getting together and trying to learn, trying to develop an understanding of how to do business, because builders, realtors, owners are all affected by this, and we better know what the rules are.
Right.
And so my goal is to learn the playbook for the interpretation of that rule.
Because you're responsible for your clients, but the nice thing is this has legs back to previous transactions for all the realtors forward. And I mean, this thing has, if you start going down different paths on this thing has all kinds of ramifications.
I had no idea what I was stepping into as I tried to solve what I thought was one owner's problem with the bureaucracy, and have now discovered a rule that I think the best way to describe it is, in all of this well-meaning legislation, and I'll repeat again, that most owners would have no problem saying, hey, that's all good for me, that's great. In the middle of it, this sentence is basically what I call the hand grenade in the hornet's nest. Because that rule, if strictly enforced, would make a large percentage of the land unbuildable and have some ramifications against existing properties, and we're going to talk about that a little bit too. So that meeting involved builders, realtors, engineers, key department staff heads, and one supervisor attended representing the Board of Supervisors. There were about, I'm going to guess, 20 to 20 people in the room for 3.5 hours, and the key CAL FIRE representative, a supervisor for two county, was there to express CAL FIRE's perspective. The bottom line on that is that, as I heard it, and John, you were there for a good portion of the meeting, is CAL FIRE's position is that these regulations are for firefighter and fire equipment safety.
Yes.
And quote unquote, that's the highest priority.
And you can understand from their perspective, as a firefighting organization, and I think in some of this is maybe timing as well, because I think this issue came up in our county where they needed clarification stuff on this, while they were in the middle of battling a huge Southern California Do you think that had any effect on it at all? Or?
You know, I'm not sure. The truth of the matter is that there's always been fires. There's
That's
always
true.
been issues.
True.
Oakland Hills, Old Gulch, the history of the state is fire issues.
Right.
This legislation was created in 1991.
Right.
So we can't look at any recent event that
Mm-hmm.
caused this.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened, as we understand it, is that CAL FIRE or at the county discovered this one clause in this legislation created in 1991,
Right.
and it conflicted with the county rules. The county rules said,
Right.
build any driveway as long as you surface it. CAL FIRE has now said, hey, Calaveras County, you're not in compliance with state regulations, and we trump you where our rule is stricter.
Right.
And so they're claiming that this is the rule of the day, and this change of horse midstream
Mm-hmm.
has major implications for the state of California and at its past highway corridor.
Now, if people are hearing and discussing some of this stuff, and now what they came in the meeting, a huge bulk, is my understanding, on that meeting was spent on possible mitigations or solutions from driveways from 16% to that 21% range.
Let's hold the 21% for a minute,
Okay.
but the word mitigation is important.
Okay.
And yeah, we don't want to do a gloom and doom thing here because we're in the middle of a process of trying to work with the fire agencies towards possible mitigations. And within this legislation,
Right.
it does say that subject to where the local fire agency, keyword may, approve mitigations for slopes greater than 16%.
Okay.
So let's just make up a story. You're more than 16%, you're 17%. But you make your driveway a little wider, you put some curbs on it.
Okay.
You do a park out for the fire truck to pull off the road. You reduce vegetation. You move the house closer to the road. Unclear yet as to exactly what needs to be done, but these could be some mitigations. And we went in with the idea, well, that's your rule, but the rule book, trying to find the rule book here, also says mitigations may be approved, and it does not in any way state what precise mitigations should be. So the emphasis of the meeting was, how can we work with you, CAL FIRE?
Right.
We're the citizens.
Right.
I'm a realtor, but in that case, I'm really a citizen and a concerned realtor to say, as everybody else has labels, but we're all citizens at the base. We
Right.
all own most people own property, and this can affect us. So what could be the possible mitigations that would get us to a point where this isn't a deal killer?
Right.
And when I
Right.
say deal killer, I mean your land is not buildable, therefore it's worthless,
Right.
to put it in a nutshell.
And so for all those property taxes you've been paying for years and years.
Well, you would go to the county and appeal for reappraisal, for reappraisal down to zero, because
Yeah.
that's what your land would be worth generally if you can't build on it. You'd be contributing open space to your neighborhood.
I think goat pasture was mentioned in the meeting several times.
There's a good one. So the mitigation discussion began.
Sure.
And CAL FIRE said, well, you know, we're not unreasonable. I think maybe not those words, but you know, the rule says 16%, no greater, but we're willing, with certain mitigations, to allow building up to 21%.
Right.
At 21%, at 22%, anything greater than 21%, 21.1, if you will,
Right. Right.
we would take a position that our fire science and research would indicate that that is unsafe for firefighter safety and proper access to the facility, and they're to a house, and they're really basing it on all fire equipment, regardless of whether it's past based or coming from Los Angeles for an emergency. Their goal in this is that they're going to drive up your driveway and go right to your front door to service you, whether it's a fire truck or an ambulance.
Right.
And so they are weighing those issues against these regulations and have said, hey, we'll go up to 21%, but quote unquote, you were there, I hope
Sure.
you heard it,
Yeah.
quote unquote from CAL FIRE, however, in no case do we see where anything greater than 21% could be approved and mitigated.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like in the gist of that meeting is they were going to things you can see where they obviously did some testing. If they parked a fire engine on a grade, it was, their criteria was if it reduced the effective capacity of tanks. You know, at that time, I mean, they were looking at functionality of fire engines.
Right, and we being citizens said, hey, that's not practical.
Right.
That's good fire science, that's good theory, but in practice, we know, and I think everyone may have seen this, is that when an emergency vehicle comes to your street, regardless of whether you have flat driveways or sloped or steep driveways, they park in the street and they begin a process of figuring out how to approach the structure and deal with the emergency.
Or if, in some cases.
Or if they,
yeah, I mean,
so this issue, this theory of theirs that an emergency vehicle needs to drive up your driveway and park to your front door is a beautiful theory, but in practice, we don't think it's very realistic.
And on that note, we were talking to a fire captain that was actually down in the Southern California fires just a few weeks ago. And I guess, you like to think that they treat every structure the same, but they really have to make the judgment rules. Like basically they were policing a neighborhood and they were basically going, okay, we're going to try to police that one, and there was some that they skipped. It's just...
yeah, and I think our position is that fire is random in all events.
Right.
It depends. There's so many factors that go into what a fire does and what burns and what's saved. And fire crews are not going to drive down a steep driveway and park it in front of a house backed up to forest in dangerous situations. That fire crew chief is going to say, let's move on. Here's a safe.
Pick a different battle.
Here's a place with good exit, good escape route. And owners, up until this rule, we all believed that we took those risks on as private citizens with our private land use issues, and that we had the right to do that. As it turns out, in doing this research, you own your home, you pay your taxes, but guess what? CAL FIRE is now regulating your driveway.
Right, and I think that's where the issue is the private property rights. If, for example, yes, if you build that home out on that point with that beautiful view or something like that, I think most people would say that from common sense perspective, there are some trade-offs. If you have that half-mile driveway out on that, that you're more exposed. I mean, that's...
Well, to say that there's private land rights is kind of pie in the sky, but let's say it differently. This goes to the heart of every person's desire to build their castle on top of the hill. And government saying, well, you can do that, but the hill can't be any steeper than 16%. We may allow you. We may allow you, if you do what we ask you to go up to 21%, but no castle on a hill greater than 21%.
And I think this ends up having some more. It may have some more intense feelings and affect more people up here in areas like this, because in some ways, for California at least, this is seen as that. The rural last bastion of go up in the hills and build your, get away from it all. And you can get away from it all as long as it's not above 16%, right? Isn't that the...
Approximately, yes. Now, what's important to do at this point in time is probably the terms 16%, 21% don't really register. If we were discussing a driveway that was this way, the public could be sitting there right now thinking, well,
of course,
maybe that's a good thing. We don't want, we don't want firefighters pulling hoses up steep driveways or trying to get equipment up there. So let's introduce the chart, John.
Here we go. And we'll take a close-up shot of this so you can see it. But I think this is something that it's quite an interesting piece. Here, go ahead and talk us through some of the lines here.
Well, it basically, this line here is 21%. The line below it is 16%. You'll do a close-up that'll be but this is very telling. In my experience in the mountains, we have never looked at slopes like this as being steep. These were referred to as gentle to moderate slopes.
Right.
So these numbers are telling, and when you look at it from the fact that I would expect that a large number of driveways in Ebbets Pass area are greater than 21%.
Now, I'd like to point out that the chart that we're going to blow up, and have a bigger slide of is done by SJB Consulting, and I think from most sides of this issue and everything else, what Steve Buckley and his group, they're arguably the consulting firm of record, so to speak, on this. I think for most or a high percentage of the real estate agents and everything else, and Steve's done a lot of work in driving and trying to get clarification on this issue, and I think that.
Well, he's the guy drawing the plans,
right?
The what are called the grade plans. Mm-hmm. He's drawing those in order to get building permits and being rejected by the new. It's not a new law, but it's a law they've uncovered and now are trying to enforce.
Now, one little, and we'll blow this up there. But one thing that's interesting as I see is, you would think that the 100% would be a straight 90-degree angle. What is the? And if you look on here, it looks the 100% almost looks more like a 4. Now, explain.
I'm a realtor, not an engineer.
Okay.
So that's another session with Steve.
All right.
But I wanted this to come from an engineer so it would be accurate and without question. So that's what we have here. But again, these are not extreme slopes for our area. No. These are, in my mind, moderate slopes at the 21%. So
now, I guess, can I ask, maybe you can tell me if this is too wrong spot in the conversation to have it, but I think one of the things that kept jumping out with me in this meeting, and I guess in some ways, is just from the vast amount, I guess from the sheer dollar amount of some of these issues, that this will probably get worked to some form of a compromise, just because it affects too many properties. At least you would hope. But I guess the thing that jumped out of the meeting for me is the question is let's say existing parcels, existing development, homes that have been here for 20, 30 years, or even ones that have been finalized 2 weeks ago. Because if you look at these slopes, just from a common sense thing, is that there's a huge number of homes, not just in the Ebbets Pass, where that's a little bit more restrictive, but like we were saying down in Copper and all the rest of the stuff down there. State of California. That if you look at that slope, there's a lot of homes that have, and if you look at the rule of just a portion of a driveway, taking that standard, whether it's a hump or, everybody has a driveway, you gotta get up a little bit of speed here to get past this spot or whatever. I guess the elephant in the room, and correct me if I'm wrong, was if those homes needed to be rebuilt or significantly remodeled or anything like that,
right? As
it stands right now, in my team was, you wouldn't be able to do so. So it's not just new construction; it's what does it do to the value of the existing properties?
This topic swirls and gets worse as you start to ask a lot of questions of the topic, which is what you're doing. And that meeting did a good job in asking a lot of questions.
Right.
But there were a lot of answers I don't know.
Okay.
And so between the county and fire people, I think there's a void of information to be able. There's a void of knowledge to be able to pin down some of these burning questions, to use a term. And that was one of the first questions that builders, realtors, citizens, engineers asked. If a house burns down, would an owner be able to rebuild? And I quoted legislation, some of the code in the meeting to the fire chief that said, oh no, here it says that would apply only to new permits. So my reading was a new home permit. He said, oh no, you're reading, we can read it the other way, which would mean your house burns down, that's going to be a new home, and you may not get a permit.
And I think wasn't the standard of it is if a house burns down and it's basically entirely gone, then you no longer have a structure. Isn't that the...
That's what I heard him say. That's right. So this is an issue that affects not only bare land, but improved land.
Right.
So anyone who owns real estate should be listening carefully to this discussion and be asking some interesting questions. I think what it does is it's going to cause you to go out, leave your house today, the next time you leave it, and take a look at your siting issues, your driveway and your approach, and take a look at it way different than you ever have before.
Now, from looking at these slope figures, it is an interesting thing. We live, in a neighborhood that's fairly and I would say where our house, or the house my wife and I live in, is, we would consider it a flat lot, so to speak.
Yes.
There is a small upslope to get into the driveway, but looking at it just intuitively, I bet there's a spot. I bet our driveway wouldn't. I bet it would actually fail, and that's the thing with this. You look at these slopes. I think there's some spots. We were probably greater than the 16% here, but if you common sense, you look at it, we probably are on as flat a lot as you find anywhere in Arnold.
Yes, and since you're my neighbor, I know that for a fact. And what it does is,
your driveway's completely flat, but ours has a little up, and we'd probably fail on
I have some slope too, but the point is, we're in the mountains. Everybody has some degree of slope generally. Flat driveways are the minimum up here. I mean, the rarity as opposed to the maximum, or the most common, is sloped lands.
Yeah.
We live in an area of sloped lands. We choose to live in an area of sloped lands.
Right.
And never before did we think that there would be a rule that would compromise our ability to use our properties.
I guess the question is we start, what's the end game? So let's say it's somebody that's looking at property in the county and stuff. I mean, what time frame, what's the end game on this?
Well, we've done the gloom and doom thing, but
sure.
But because this is a new issue, and we tend to be really concerned, but what came out of that meeting is that a smaller group, which will be called key individuals that would represent different groups, and there are two of us, Barry Ward from Barry Ward Realty, and myself, Doug Shinn, Cedar Creek Realty, will represent the realtors at another meeting with the fire people.
Okay.
And what they're doing right now is trying, as fire chiefs, a fire group in the county is trying to develop what they think are the reasonable mitigations from 16 to 21.
Right.
And once they finalize those, they're going to give them to the citizens, to the citizen representatives, and we're going to reconvene and begin to discuss the issue and develop and work towards realistic and agreed upon mitigations, which would help us from 16 to 21. And I think also at that meeting, the citizen groups are going to really have to challenge their position that nothing can be done greater than 21%.
Yeah.
Because it's not stated in the code that way, and we would challenge them on that.
So basically the code says nothing above 16%, but it doesn't say that you couldn't mitigate that. Isn't that? So I guess the difference is...
No driveway greater than 16%.
Period. Right.
But mitigations may be approved.
Allowed. Right.
Now, if the fire officials say, no, you can't do that, then that didn't work in your favor. And if they say, sure, that's okay with us, then you'd be able to get a building permit or rebuild in the case of a fire. So but those mitigations don't exist.
Right. As we sit right now, the mitigations don't exist. Isn't that correct?
Right. Now, in the past, local fire districts, in our case up here, Ebbets Fire District, has gone out and looked at lots, written for mitigation, and that's been approved at the county. I think the county is, at this point in time, not approving anything greater than 16%.
Okay.
And I think to be safe. And so we have owners that are in queue for building permits that are being affected this very moment. In addition, that has spin-off to the construction industry. We know for a fact that we have contractors letting crews go because they can't get started on projects. So this could have a serious economic impact on the county.
Yeah.
As a result of that meeting, I wrote a report, and Barry and I released it recently as the synopsis of that meeting.
Okay.
And we'll give contact information for Barry and myself at the end of this interview. And you can contact us. We can email or mail you this report, which will give greater insight into this issue. And we intend to present this to the Board of Supervisors in public comments as soon as we can. We're working with our local supervisor, Marita Calloway, to help us through this process. The purpose of this interview really is to get this word out so that people are start asking questions, become more familiar,
yeah.
And perhaps if they feel as I do that this government rule is not good for them,
yes,
maybe there would be an end game solution, which would probably require changing the rules at the state level, which is not an easy thing.
Right.
In the meantime, mitigations will be developed that hopefully will take care of some of the people in the 16 to 21% range and make it better. And then we have to try and work towards a solution of what does it mean above 21%.
Now, I guess as a point of clarification, I want to say that this isn't trying to go after some of the fire personnel. I mean, they do a great job, but I guess, and also want to say that some of the local fire districts, for example, on EPFD with Chief Warren Wilson, they've been very proactive in trying to find a solution for this because these are their neighborhoods and things like this. So the rub is really not with your local fire entities specifically, but I mean, this is a state issue kind of between the CAL FIRE now and
yeah, we have.
I mean,
we have the community, we have our local fire district. For us, Ebbets Pass Fire District.
Sure.
I'm not positive, but I think there's more than 5 districts in Calaveras County.
Right.
Could be.
Right.
I really don't know the number, but
Mm-hmm.
there's many local fire agency, but they have to observe the state law.
right.
And so their mitigations have to take all of that into effect. So CAL FIRE's carrying a pretty big stick here, John.
And it seems so, because I mean, if you look at these slopes, and we'll do the thing, is what we're sensing here, and what we're seeing from comments from EPFD is what they've said in these meetings is they're taking a little more of a common sense approach. They'll go out to a parcel and say, okay, we can do this. This is not going to be a big issue. You're good to go. Isn't that, I mean, in the short version of that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a lot of factors that go into how they get onto a property.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, bottom line, this could be seen as the very basic. At what point will a firefighter refuse to carry a haul a hose up a hill because the slope is too great?
We don't want to digress because we could probably be here for another hour. Better stay on
it's
point.
Complicated, but I would like to read
some
from the report because I think it's succinct. As you can see, these questions go to the heart of land and home ownership and can affect the entire county economy. For those unable to get permits approved at this time, it is already a hardship. We believe that answers need to be fashioned as soon as possible so that we can have a game plan, which we don't now. Additionally, out of the meeting, and I think from all the information, we have some burning questions. Number one, are existing subdivisions that were created before 1991 exempt from these regulations?
Right.
And the fire official believed that the Attorney General had rendered an opinion that said no, but that could be reviewed. 2, will CAL FIRE's position make vacant land in excess of 21% driveway slope unbuildable? Real simple question. 3, where a structure exists with a driveway greater than 21% and it burns all the way down, either to a home fire or in a forest fire, will another building permit be issued?
Right.
And I pause because that's a big question.
It's a big question. I mean, because just from the inventory of properties, that's, in some ways, that's a much bigger economic issue than even the buildable lots going forward. I mean, because that's...
Yeah. Number 4, how will realtors sell existing homes built on a driveway above 21%, and what do they need to disclose and how?
Yeah.
And what is the impact of telling a seller or a buyer that a home may not be able to be rebuilt? And I think we know the answer to it. I mean, if you think about it, you kind of know that answer, which is a buyer's not going to buy.
Or is it
and
insurable?
The seller can't sell, or is it insurable?
Because if they can't pay out fire insurance to get it rebuilt, anyway.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of legs to this, everywhere you go.
What are, number 5, what are acceptable mitigations that will be required to obtain a building permit? Can fire chiefs and the public agree upon these options? And that's to be learned as we go down the road. How reasonable are they going to be? 6, what is Calaveras County's official position on these issues?
Yeah.
We're citizens. We need government help from our local representatives. 7, what does Calaveras County understand the financial loss that would occur if a landowner is told they cannot build?
Right.
8, does Calaveras County understand the potential for loss of property tax due to the devaluing of unbuildable lots? If it's worth $100,000 today as a sloped lot of 21%, no permit can be obtained. 22%, let's say.
Yeah.
Is it now worth 0? And that's the tax basis for the county.
Right.
9, who is the inspecting agency where a driveway slope is greater than 16%? This needs to be fleshed out so that a process of getting a building permit can be easily handled.
Mm-hmm.
And number 10, more questions as we move forward, because we learn more every day about this issue and its impact. And that's part of why we're doing this, because somebody out there right now is sitting here thinking, well, what about me in this situation? And we want to hear from you.
Mm-hmm.
And we would hope that the public also, maybe someone's related to Arnold Schwarzenegger and could put a phone call out to say, hey, this is not good for citizens, this is not good for the state of California, this has to be addressed and addressed immediately. Perhaps I'm an idealist, which I've been accused of many times, but this is where we may need to go. Now, nobody in this process believes that firefighters should be at risk, although they are in a risky trade.
Right.
And we don't want to make it worse for them, and we want to do all that we can as citizens to support them in their efforts. But at some point in time, citizens have rights too, and we have to look at our own position and say, you know what? 30 to 100 feet, that was good for me. I'm happy to make my contribution. But giving up my land so that somebody doesn't have to fight it in an unsafe position seems a bit extreme to me, John.
Does, and I think this one also, it does scream for some state intervention a little bit, because I know, and from what we heard earlier this week when we were talking to Sheriff Downham, we were talking on the jail issue. Because he went to a meeting last week, at the time of this last week, on the jail issues. He didn't actually see the letter, but he was alluded to the fact that there was a letter circulating around from the governor's office basically saying that Calaveras County needs to get its jail built, so make some adjustments on some of the funding limits and spending limits for this county. So I think even recently, I think the governor has taken some interest in some issues specific to this county, and I think and this one screams it, because the thing is the common sense angle. Is one, you hear all these numbers in abstract, 21%, 16%, and right now the death sentence on parcels or properties with a driveway slope of greater than 21%, you think, wow, that's that makes sense. Until you actually look at the slope and what these actual slopes look like, and then it just seems to where it just looks at it's like, okay, this doesn't make sense. And I think that
I got to that place pretty quick in the analysis. The owner who's having trouble has a driveway at 20.9%.
Yes.
And can't get through the bureaucracy, even with a letter for mitigations from its past fire district.
Right.
So it's basically come to a screeching halt. If you're in that 16% or greater, you're going to have a hard time getting a permit right now, because this issue is so fresh.
And I guess for our county government, for what was your take out of the meeting? Mine was is Calaveras County is obviously they're worried of liability issues and things like this. So if they go through county council, before they can do mitigations on this, it may actually need to be presented to the Attorney General. Isn't that some of the? Well, they were hoping it didn't go there.
Some of the questions that I've asked need answers, and it may take the county council doing the research and coming up with an answer, and then forwarding those questions to the Attorney General to develop opinions that will carry the weight of law. But we would both know that this would take a long time.
A long time.
In the meantime, crews are out of business, John, and owners are going to have a great deal of concern after hearing this report as to how this could affect them in the future. Again, the world's full of issues, but this one lay dormant for a lot of years and has cropped up out of the blue.
Yes.
And what I would hope is that we have a very reactive citizenry. We have the Calaveras Builders Association that attended both meetings. We have engineers who are proactive because they need to know how to do business. Realtors need to know how to do business, and we're proactive. And all of these groups are great, but at the same time, I would hope that Calaveras County would be the point man on this.
Yeah.
This is our supervisors should have this information in front of them and be absolutely pushing for answers and for modifications that would limit any hardship to our citizens.
And on that note, I think that, I think there's a sense of it as well, as I think most reasonable people, I guess, if you want to look at these numbers, can say, okay, something needs to be done here. But I think also is there needs to be some speed on it, because in a soft market to where there's a lot of people hanging on by a thread in some of these things here, issues like this that basically stick in the spokes of progress can be that last straw, so to speak, for a lot of people. This needs to get done quickly.
Yes.
Just from, you see this and it's like you see this issue and it looks like on the surface it may have the potential to fester for a long time, and I think there's a lot of people that can't afford to have it just simmer.
Speed is one of the things that we wrote in the report, and for right now we're waiting for the county fire group to come up with proposed mitigations, and we expect to see that we expect them to act on that January 9th, 2008.
Okay.
They'll then
they'll have their list.
They'll provide that to us, giving the citizens a chance to provide input and say, hey, those are great, just what you wrote, or say, have you thought of this, this, and this. The issue here is so difficult because from a practical view and reasonableness, which you've used several times, and then you talk to people who say, well, wait a minute, you're dealing with government.
Right.
And that may be two different things.
Right.
So we have to find a way to bring government into the main of practicality as it affects our area, because this is, there's many areas in California like us, but if you're in sloped land, this can have a huge impact.
Yeah, and I guess without trying to, it's not trying to make this problem seem greater than it is, but I guess in some ways, we were talking before we started, is some of the gut feelings, this may affect as much as 25% of maybe, it could be a huge percentage, and if you look at these slope figures, you'll see that, and you'll be like, wow.
We don't know how many properties could be affected.
But if you look at these slope lines, you'll see that, and literally, if you look at what is that dollar volume of property of inventory, of inventory, if you're a real estate business, that is in fact unsaleable right now, or it makes it so it's off the market in some ways until it gets clarified.
Here's an immediate reaction: is that if, as a realtor, if I look at a slope and as I begin to learn how to interpret the chart to the land, because we've never had to do that before.
Right.
We've never looked at driveway slopes. We had no concerns about driveway slopes.
Right.
Prior to a month ago.
You knew it had to be mitigated if it was steep. It had to be paved or grooved or whatever.
That was never an issue. Builders knew how to do that, and they took care of that, but you had to get a septic system to be able to build. That was the rule of the land. Practice in the land. What we would immediately see is if we see a vacant piece of land that we're going to bring on the market, we would say to an owner, you're going to need a slope analysis by an engineer. Cost for that could be $1,000 to $3,000. As soon as you have your slope analysis, we'll determine whether we can list you or not. Because if you're greater than 21%, we'd be wasting our time, depending on what we learn from future meetings. You're less than 16%, we'll put that in the file, and you're more marketable as a vacant land.
So in essence, right now, if anything is over that 21% or something like that, it's questionable where those should even be on the market right now. Then until this gets clarified, then
that's why we have to clarify, because it affects people's ability to buy and sell. We're not talking rich people. We're talking everybody who needs to buy and sell. And I go by a saying in sales that nothing in life happens unless something is sold.
True.
And that affects real estate as well as all segments of the economy.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. I know
John,
there's
thank
a lot of people behind the scenes have said, there's been several key people, with Doug is one of the primary ones, that have spent a huge amount of time over the last month, I know, going through and looking, because this is a complex issue. It's, in some ways, what you think is Calaveras County issue, but it's a statewide issue, and it's been one of those problems that you kind of are almost amazed looking at it, because we're talking 1991 and 92 regulations. It's
yes.
not, they're not new, and this is something to where seeing it come into the forefront right now is in this manner, because this is, and without trying to overstate this, there's literally billions of dollars worth of property in the county right now. I mean, if you add the numbers up county-wide, this affects their viability, not only to be rebuilt and everything else, but we said marketable, to be marketable. I mean, this is a huge issue. I mean, just huge. I mean, it's just
that's what I thought. I mean, I didn't know that going in, but the more I got into it and the more I learned what we're up against here, it's daunting. Let's put it that way. We need some serious answers. We need leadership from the county. Our citizens are going to do everything that we
Sure.
can to come up with some answers, and hopefully we can have a positive report from our meetings with the fire officials in January and come back to the public and say, hey, we've got good news, we've gotten some interpretations, we've gotten some mitigations,
Sure.
and this is not the issue that we were afraid it would be. But nobody has been able to tell us, as we met with key officials,
yeah.
They were not able to answer the questions that we have.
Yeah, they can't give a clear answer on this right now, I guess. Is that
the most common statement from that meeting was, I don't know.
Right.
And that's okay.
Sure.
Well, learning what we don't know can get us to what we need to know, and that's where we are right now.
So the only option is just incorporating from, say, Murphy's on up? Is that the...
If we're a municipality, we don't apply, the state rules would not apply. That's
right.
true. So that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, I'm just joking.
But again, contact Barry Ward at Barry Ward Realty,
okay.
And you'll put up a graphic with phone and email contact for Barry and for myself. Unless you're involved with builders, associated with the Builders Association, contact supervisors. We need input from the public as to their questions, which will give us more research to do as we work with the county fire officials.
Okay.
So we'll do all that we can, but we need people's help on this, John. We
yeah.
can't do it by ourselves.
Yeah. And as a question, I guess the last little going piece, it looks like on the bigger scope, we've actually heard some pretty decent things about the real estate market. I mean, this has a chance to kind of cool those, but I mean, we're hearing that there's, as the market's been softening, so we're kind of we're hearing better numbers on traffic numbers as far as looking at listings and things. We've actually heard some pretty decent things as far as, better, right? Isn't that? I mean, this has the potential to slow things down again, but
well, this doesn't help at all.
That doesn't help at all. Yeah, I know.
I think I can boil it down from a citizen's point of view and from a realtor's point of view. In my mind, these regulations don't help us. That certainly the driveway issue doesn't help.
Yeah.
So maybe that's an interview for another day. But we're always looking for the silver lining in the cloud, and we're going to find that through some reasonable mitigations and move forward from there, we hope.
Thank you for your time this morning, and thank you for the time that he spent on this issue. And
I tried to be brief. This is the best I can
do. It wasn't a brief topic. This is one of those things that has all kinds of legs for existing parcels, everything else. And we'll follow this as it goes through. And this isn't meant to be a jab at our county government or anything like that, because we know that they have to manage both sides of this issue as far as managing liability risk for the county, because this issue comes up a lot. And kind of the big picture thing is we hope, and we kind of get the feeling from both sides, that this issue is too big not to be solved in some ways. So I think it'll get solved. It's just a matter of timing and getting it done quickly.
contact us for a copy of the report.
Okay.
It's only 2 pages.
Right.
It's pretty succinct. It'll boil it down in a way that maybe we weren't able to today. Copy of the chart.
We'll put our driveway slope up there as well.
And take a look at your driveway and see where you fit in the mix. If you're on a flat driveway, congratulations. But if you're not, like many people, then we're going to have lots of questions that we have to answer for you. So
and this is amazing because even on our driveway, I can know that the initial probably there may not be much, but maybe like a 6 or 8 foot section that I bet's above 21%.
The CAL FIRE official stated that it's not an average; it's any portion of your driveway. Greater than 16% or greater than 21% is what they look at. So if you have a 5 foot section above 21%, your entire property may not comply.
Yeah, you have that little 21. It's like you got just a little blip off the road until you get up. It's like, wow, that'd throw the whole thing out.
Yep. So we've got lots of questions, more to come, and we sure hope we get some answers. Thank you.
And Merry Christmas, right? This is a nice little...
Ho, 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 and Merry Christmas. Life is full of surprises, and this was a big one, too.
All right, thanks, Deb.